Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy McCory, and I'm the CEO here at the Greater Issaquah Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to thank you for joining us today for our monthly webinar series that we bring to the business community. I am very honored today to introduce Jerry Blackburn for us. Jerry is going to be talking about wrangling stress and burnout in the modern workplace. And I know that we're all experiencing that either ourselves personally, or we're watching our teammates and peers go through it on occasion. So I think there's nothing more timely to talk about than this. Let me tell you a little bit about Jerry. Jerry Blackburn serves as the program director for Empower Youth Network. In addition to joining the EYN team, Jerry, as an adjunct facility member in the Clinical Mental Health Counseling Program at the Seattle University. Jerry is a graduate of the University of Washington with a Master's of Education and has been certified been a certified substance use disorder professional since 1999. And Jerry, that's a mouthful.
It is.
In the community, Jerry currently serves as a founding board member for The Garage, the Issaquah Teen Cafe, Parent Wiser, the PTSA Council Education Committee, and the Greater Issaquah Equity and Inclusion Group. So with that, I'm going to turn everything over to Jerry today, and we're going to save Q&A for the end. So make sure you hang on, write your questions down so that at the end of the session, I can ask your questions for you. If you would please try to use chat, that will be great. In the meantime, I will try my hardest to monitor both chat and questions for you. So Jerry, are you ready to take it away?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Thank you,
great.
Kathy. It's so
Thank
great
you.
to be here and supporting my local Chamber of Commerce. Let me share my screen real quick, and then we can go from there. Hopefully that's working and everybody can see. Let's see from beginning. Boom, there we go. And Kathy was right. This is really a timely conversation. I'm coming at this little presentation from a couple of different angles. One, as I work at the university in the clinical mental health counseling program, a lot of the work that we do is founded or caveated around the idea of helping future clinicians have the capacity to manage really, really difficult work circumstances. And as Kathy had pointed out, that reality, our work circumstances being really kind of profoundly difficult at times, has really bled over into a lot of different work environments as of late, especially with COVID. And so I come at it from that standpoint. I also come at it from the standpoint of program direction and managing staff members and wrangling our own structures as an organization. And then also my own personal experiences as a clinician when I was working in direct services in residential hospitalization for young people with substance use disorders. I found myself in a spiral on several occasions, but one that was relatively profound, where I really couldn't self-intervene. And I was kind of at the end of this process, really looking at leaving my job and just not seeing any solutions. It was really a function of option reduction. And so a lot of all of that is again, my own personal experience. And then working with counselors and helping folks in their workplace be comfortable and productive and stuff. So that's kind of the foundation. I think it's really beneficial also to just acknowledge our culture. American culture is very geared towards productivity, but productivity that's very specific, and it's often it involves our work place, right? Whenever you're at a cocktail party or out in the community, like one of those first questions people ask are, "Hey, what do you do?" Right? Our well-being and our self-esteem is often tied to our productivity within the workplace, and so I think that's a really important piece to kind of acknowledge when we set the stage for this discussion, because it really is super indicative to what we experience as American workers. And so the other thing that I think it's important to acknowledge is that our landscape, I know the Chamber has had a couple different discussions about just the changing landscape, what our work environments look like now in comparison. So as a prevention provider, as a program manager, I'm still in a role where I have the opportunity to be in the office somewhere around 50% of the time, because what I do is very collaborative with the staff that I work with. But also I have the flexibility of being in my home environment where I am now. I actually left my office because this is kind of more conducive to speaking. I'm used to that when I'm teaching, and if I'm doing virtual stuff, this is like my zone. And so there's advantages to that, but there's also disadvantages, as we'll kind of talk about that, because I get a presentation, which is kind of part of my workday, like, oh, I'm still at my house. And so how do we effectively manage that transition and allow our brains to disconnect from one reality and embrace another reality when we're in the same physical space, right? That's different than traveling to a position and then leaving that job and going home and the realities of those. So I think that's an important caveat as we think about our new work landscapes. We've had what people refer to as the Great Resignation, and so employees seem to have a benefit in terms of what they're setting up in terms of expectations for their work environments. And so those are all ongoing conversations. But I think again, as a foundation piece, we should consider what that landscape looks like and the advantages and potential liabilities of those structures. The other thing that we wanted to talk about today was simply some of the signs and symptoms of burnout. And you'll probably notice very rapidly that I don't have listed any signs and symptoms of burnout. And there's a really good reason for that. What I found working with individuals in the community and my own experiences with burnout is that it's really individualistic. And so we have to kind of acknowledge our own baselines. But what I like to do in thinking about symptoms or symptomology of burnouts and stress management is to think about ourselves holistically and think about burnouts and the progression of burnout as something that is holistic in nature. And so this graphic represents that process. And so if you think about that outer ring, what's first to kind of go in terms of that decompensation is our spiritual sense, our spiritual nature, our value systems, our well-being starts to be frayed. Thinking about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, we start to kind of feel uncomfortable with the realities of our circumstances. There's not something that's not quite right. It's starting to wear on us a little bit in different ways. And this is really an opportunity for us to self-diagnose, right? To be able to acknowledge that and hopefully turn that around somewhat quickly. But again, our culture really is indicative, right, of productivity or supports productivity that goes through and continues to support the process of working in spite of discomfort, right? If anybody's just watched commercials for medications, like cold medications, they're very frequently geared around like so that you can get back to work, right? That you can work even though you're sick, right? Like that's our mindsets. And so it's rare that somebody might pick up on that discomfort as anything but almost an interpersonal liability, right? It's not my environment. It's not what I'm experiencing. It's me as a person, all right? And obviously I need to step up and pull myself up by my bootstraps and just work a little harder and push on through and manage that. And that's often what we do. I know I do it. I know people in my work fields who really see those obligations differently than I think we have in the past, and so I think that's an important thing to acknowledge. As we ignore those or use defense systems to manage that discomfort, we start to experience more telltale signs of burnout as we decompensate. And so we're talking about mental acuity, cognitive capabilities, high risk emotions become more accessible. I'm quicker to jump at things. I'm irritated more easily. And again, this is specific to your baseline, thinking about what your baseline is. Anybody who knows me in the community knows that, and my wife says this all the time, I'm like one of the most patient individuals that she's ever met. And a lot of that comes from learning how to be that, working in a residential hospital for young people who had substance use disorders, right? It's a place where you get to practice patience on a consistent basis. So when I'm easily irritated, the people around me kind of go, huh, that's not usual for him. And so that's one of my telltale signs, right? I also notice, again, some of the confusion. Things aren't coming to me as rapidly as they usually are. I'm not concise in my conversations. It's just something's a little bit off. So again, that mental and emotional capability starts to decline, and others might notice that. One of the solutions that we'll talk about in a little bit is just also letting other people know what you look like when you're decompensating, so they can be part of your support network. They can be part of your interventions, right? If you're in relationships with other people who are concerned about you, they probably can recognize those, right, pretty rapidly. But it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to respond to them. But again, keeping an eye on how we're managing emotions, what they look like. Am I experiencing high risk emotions? And then again, as that decompensation continues to progress, there's a physicality. And I imagine lots of us have experienced the physicality of stress, right? My telltale signs are a couple. I get the eye twitch thing very rapidly, right? I'll be at Fred Meyer on a weekend and I'm like, are people staring at me? Like, I know that that's visible, right? You get leg twitches. Those are stress responses. Sleep disturbances are super common. I don't know if any of you are the wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning people. I'm one of those individuals. On occasion, I'll have a notebook there because I know I'm not going to fall asleep unless I figure out how to get what's in my brain onto the paper. Right. But that can go even further in terms of unmanaged stress and burnout to gastrointestinal struggles. It can actually evolve into hair loss. I mean, anything that you can think of in terms of a trauma response, right? A limbic system response, which is what stress is. If we transcend to that toxic environmental response, then we're going to have all the physical symptoms of that. And that is trauma, right? That's an adverse an adverse experience in terms of trauma conversations. And so our limbic system is just running. Lots of people notice that when they do take a break or they go on vacation, they get sick right when they stop. Right? That's indicative of somebody who has been experiencing significant stress. They're managing a system that's geared towards almost fight responses. And so when they discontinue and they're able to relax, their immune system subsides and they're just more susceptible to illness. And so again, that's a really indicative of a progressed part of that process, right? That cognitive decline going into high-risk emotional responses to just the emotional responses are not appropriate to circumstance. And then again, that physical distress and discomfort. So again, thinking about your baseline, go and write all of your normal traits down. What does your baseline look like? And then allow other people to kind of be aware of that if you are in a position where you're experiencing a great deal of stress, so that you know what your signs and symptoms are, because they really are very varied. And then we want to look at what some of the potential solutions are, right? Especially in our current work environment. What can we do? And as a recovering individual, this is one of my favorite mantras or sayings, especially when I get uncomfortable with things, right? If nothing changes, absolutely nothing is going to change, which means that I probably have to implement something. Something around me needs to be altered in order for there to be a positive result. And so if you're experiencing discomfort and stress and burnout, you're going to have to do something, or the system's going to have to change in some way for there to be a result, right? We just can't sit and magically hope that everything's going to alter itself just simply because we want that to happen. And so I think it's important to realize that we're going to have to potentially make some changes. I broke them down into kind of internal and structural and external. So thinking about external things, one of the difficulties that I think our culture really supports is a constant connection with work. We are, we have cellular devices. We're always around individuals and from our work environment, and we communicate with them on a consistent basis. So it becomes just part of our culture, right? We're always being asked of things that are specific to our work environment. So how do we actually disconnect? One of those things is obviously through our technology. But the other thing that one of my students brought up in a presentation, which I thought was brilliant, was the idea of de-rolling. And de-rolling is a term that comes from actual like theater and people who are in the acting. What it means is discontinuing your work as this individual in that role, and then returning to you as an individual. And so I think that that's a valuable thing for us to do. Like I said, I'm in my home office, which is my home. And so when I get done work, how do I know that I'm done work? Right? My brain isn't able to just turn this into a new environment. So de-rolling can help that. My favorite example of de-rolling in two directions is Mr. Rogers. If you remember the Mr. Rogers show, he did a wonderful job of coming into character for the show and leaving the show out of character, returning to his home environment. He would walk in, he would change his shoes, he would put on a sweater, he would get ready for the show. And then at the end, he would do it in reverse and walk off. That's an example of de-rolling, right? So what do we do to change this environment to represent our new environment, our home again, right? Whether it's closing the office door and leaving it closed. One of my old mentors, when I first started in the field, actually used to have a sweater on the back of his chair every day. And I looked and I noticed that he had never wore that sweater during the day. And I really was confused. I'd come in for the swing shift at about, noon, and lunchtime, he'd be sitting there eating his lunch and he'd have the sweater on. And then when he left, I would notice that it was hanging on his door hook. And I asked him one day, I was like, Preston, you got to tell me about the sweater. And he's like, oh, so when I come in, I grab the sweater off the hook, I put it on the back of my chair, and that means that I'm working, and that's my work environment. And when I leave, I set it there, and I leave everything that I had at work here because that's where it should stay. Right. Again, and we're working in behavioral health with really difficult circumstances. And so it made sense, but it really makes sense for all of us, like that work can stay in that environment. So if you're at home, figuring out a way to change your environment or your perception of it so that you are elsewhere. Notifications is a big one. Our phones ring and buzz and tell us that we have to be doing something immediately. And so really making a concerted effort to turn off notifications. Something that I did that was really difficult, and I'm still wrestling with it. In my new job position, I didn't put my new work email on my phone. And I wanted to see if I could manage that productively. And for the last, I don't know how many months, the world has not caught on fire since I don't have my work email on my phone. And again, I turned off notifications because, again, if we're not able to separate those two times, that's a stress response. That's a trauma-based response. We're just in work mode all the time. You're stressed when you jump a little if your notifications go off, right? If there's a level of urgency that's immediate, when you hear that buzz or that ding, that means that physiologically you have a unique connection to that. And we have to find a way to sever that, right? That's not a normal response that should be happening to a notification. It should be okay to leave, right? Obviously, emergencies are emergencies, and that's different. But the other thing to think about is, what is your workplace culture? Does your workplace culture conducive to self-care and managing stress and burnout and separating the two environments? And that goes for upper level management, middle management, and the individuals. We noticed at our workplace that we are so communicative that it became difficult to not communicate instantaneously when things were going on, and everybody's working different schedules. So ostensibly, we're communicating nonstop. And so for some people, it's like, how do I, if my boss sends me email at 8 o'clock at night, how do I feel about not responding to that, right? And so setting up those things, front loading them in terms of your work environment, right? You're not expected to respond to emails in your non-work time and all of that wonderful stuff, and making the culture really conducive to that. I always found that personality evaluations are helpful too, like Myers-Briggs, or fun ones that are color-coded, just so that we know who we're working around and we know what their style of communication and process is. So then we can also front load information, right? We send out information beforehand on paper to everybody and they get to read it in advance. I'm not one of those people. I like to get into the meeting, right? And I don't want to do a lot of prep and stuff like that. That's not how I process information. But all of those things are good to know about the folks around us, so that we're not leaving anybody out, and then their buckets are being filled up as we go. And then again, thinking about external processes or internal processes. What can we do personally? And these are going to sound just almost lame because they're so commonplace, but right, we'll do it anyway. Eating well, right? Taking care of yourself physically. Nutrition is such an important part of this process. And that's one of the things that go when you're going nonstop. It's so much easier to pick up stuff on the way, grabbing food that's fast food oriented and stuff. And so we have to really think about planning and making sure that we're taking care of ourselves physically. Exercise is one of the greatest things that we can do for managing internal stress and warding off burnout on a long-term basis. And that doesn't mean you're going to the gym 12 times a day. It just means getting out and walking and just taking care of yourself physically, right? Getting your heart rate up for a good 20 minutes a day is all that exercise really entails to be healthier and to manage burnout. Tons of studies regarding the benefits of being outside in nature. Not today because it's on fire out there, but in most occasions, right? Getting outside, being in arenas that are filled with just the greater outdoors is really good for your well-being holistically. There's some level of connection that we have to nature that's really soothing. Studies regarding being close to water and how it matches and mimics our natural flows. Physiologically and neurologically. It's just a great way to, again, disconnect for a brief period of time. Practicing mindfulness, putting your feet on the floor for 5 minutes, feeling where you're at, being where you're at. Our culture is really not good at being present, right? It's even hard, like my phone's sitting here, and it's sort of hard to like go, okay, what's next, right? We're always in that place where we're worried about what's next. I was working on a job description today, and it actually had the term, as a quality, good at multitasking. And we were like, no, that needs to come out. Good at project management, right? Or managing multiple projects, but multitasking is just trying to do too many things at once. So how do we stay mindful? The reason that mindfulness is so important is because the most stressful places we can be are in the future, which we don't have control over, and the past, which we don't have control over. But our brains kind of still process that like we can. Right? It's like that old adage in presentations. There's, the presentation you want to give, the one you give, and the one you wish you gave, right? And so thinking about how can I just stay in the moment? right? How can I just be here? And then again, taking those mindfulness moments to just sit back, clear your brain a little bit when you're transitioning to a new task. Those are all super beneficial. And then finally, anything that we can do to manage gratitude, right? And to support the idea of understanding and practicing gratitude. I always think of gratitude as an action, something that we can do in the community, in our general area, random acts of kindness, bringing fresh fruit to the office, like just those acts just fill up places in us that are antidotes to the stress and burnout that we might be experiencing. And it's just a great way to kind of feel better holistically. And we should obviously add to that sleep. A lot of times we push away sleep as something that we have to do at the end, and sleep practices and being aware of sleep as a really important part of who we are as individuals, I think really should get some or garner some attention. Sleep is not something that we have to do as a result of all the other stuff. It's something that we should do and practice and be aware of as an important part of our own overall health. And so thinking about all of those practices, there's such wonderful amounts of research specific to the benefits of creating a work environment and a place where people can thrive in terms of what they're doing. The overall happiness, the ability to recognize struggles in other individuals, to be communal, to check in, all the things that we think a lot of times is secondary, actually create an atmosphere where our work environment and overall what we have as output is actually greater, right? I'm much better as a holistically comfortable individual doing the things that I'm asked to do in my work environment versus the individual who's just going really, really fast, 100 miles an hour with my hair on fire, trying to get things done. That's not really as productive as we want individuals probably. And so how do we support that, right? How do we keep individuals within the system healthy and successful? And so taking care of and having practices internally and externally to manage stress and burnout is how we go about it. It's our almost like our bread and butter in terms of having a wonderful workplace, one that's conducive to people staying and putting in the time and energy and doing the things that our organization ultimately has been charged for doing, right? It's an important part of that process. So, yeah. So real quick, 20 minutes on some just general information about burnout and stress responses, and then we can switch over and see if anybody has any questions or if we can elaborate on anything. Let's switch over.
Yes, I'm unmuting my mic, so thank you very much. That is great information. And let me just check and see here. I've got a screen that keeps popping up and getting in my way a little bit. So giving time for people to put questions in their chat room, but one of the things you touched on was work care. And so since many of our listeners and the people that will be watching this afterwards when it's in our video library, they have employees. And so question being, what can employers do to be more supportive and enhance the work care environment for their team?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what we recognize is, and what I recognized in myself, is that I have to model those behaviors, right? It's one thing to say, it's really important for you to take care of yourself. But when somebody gets to work at 7:30 and you're already there, but you don't start till 8, and then everybody leaves and you're still there and it's 10 hours in, right? Those things are what people see. And so there's a difference between policy and practical application. And so we really have to be the individuals who demonstrate to folks around us that this is really important and it's part of what we want to represent in our workplace environment. And so, yeah. Also, again, taking advantage of the opportunities to support individuals to practice those if they're having struggles. I've always, when my employees are going on vacation, I always joke a little bit, but also I've done it for other individuals at other companies that I worked for. I offer to change their email passwords if they like me to. And so we can get together, change it, we'll hide it. And then when you get back from your vacation, we'll reconnect you and then you can manage your email when you return. Because for some people, it's almost such an expectation that they still work when they're not supposed to be working. So yeah, at the top of the list, obviously, demonstrating that from the top down. And then secondly, what can we do in terms of our policies and our procedures to take advantage and note self-care practices, having self-care moments, bringing information to our staff meetings about self-care, taking a mindfulness moment at our next staff meeting or every staff meeting, and allowing people to see that on a consistent basis.
Great. And one of the other questions was you had referred to the sweater and marking that. So can you give maybe a couple other examples of how a person might kind of, because I think what they might do, the idea is to leave work at work, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which again, is difficult if you're in your home office and you have to like spin around and go, oh, I'm still here. And so let's see, what have I seen people do in the past? One of my friends would play a Sudoku puzzle real quick, right? So when they would discontinue one activity or one engagement, they would do a Sudoku puzzle. And then when they got done, they would shut down their computer and then like travel on to the next environment. I'm thinking about things that I can do. It's really creating your own ceremony to some extent. If you like a piece of music that could end your day, right? Even if it's just this loud, like booming Led Zeppelin song that just crushes the end of your day, right? Play that. And when it's done, you can close your computer and your work environment is now set aside. Some people can do it with their lights, ceremoniously turning on and off your lights. Yeah, I mean, it's really about you and your personal creativity and what demonstrates it for you. It could be a coffee cup that you have on your desk, moving something on your desk, shutting something down, turning something off, turning something around, getting one of those open close signs from Home Depot or Lowe's or something and put it on your bulletin board and just turn it around and close for the day, right? And walk out. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different experiences that you can create to do that, but it ultimately creates, I'm a big fan of neurophysiology, right, in the work that I do, and it creates a new physiological pathway for your brain to take you to a place of comfort, right? Your brain creates these neurophysiological pathways through a process called plasticity, right? Neuroplasticity. And so you're creating one. And so that the more that you practice it, the better it will feel for that process to take place. And you can discontinue and move forward and go, and you'll notice a physiological change, right? Whether it is a mindfulness moment, whether it is on a whiteboard, a little checkbox, and you check it. And when you check it, you're done for the day and you walk out, right? There's lots of ways to kind of create those for yourself.
That is great, Jerry. That's I'm a visual person, so I can definitely relate to that. And I do want to be mindful of the time. It's a little after our half hour that we allow for our video recordings. We want to make sure that people get as much information in a shorter period of time as possible. And you packed it in today. So I want to say thank you very much for that. And just
You're
to
quite
remind
welcome.
everyone that this webinar will work its way onto our video library. You'll find links to it in next Monday's newsletter. So if you want to share it and tell people about it, make sure you let your teammates and other professionals you know to check in to our newsletter on Monday and get the link for Jerry's webinar here today. Jerry, thank you again on behalf of the Chamber of
You're welcome,
Commerce
Kathy.
for bringing
Yeah.
this really important issue. There's just, stress levels with everything we've been through the past few years and everything we're still experiencing in our brave new world, I always want to say,
Exactly.
is important. So thank you very much again. I'm going to go ahead and shut off our recording.